All right, let's start this over. Okay, so as I was saying before, why do we vertically integrate? The answer is a standard question that goes with any reason for being in the business. I'm going to tell you this. I want you to remember a phrase when I come up and tell you that the real reason that you vertically integrate is to increase your return. When any of you get into and you want to sound intelligent when somebody comes up with a new idea, remember what's the projected return on investment? That'll make sense. Okay. So what is a return on investment? You have three major players, all right? You have three major categories, or you have revenues, basically is exactly what it says. It's all of the sales that are generated before costs. It is your direct costs, all the costs that are directly associated with producing those particular goods. And then indirect costs are what we call overhead. These are simply the cost of doing business that there's no way to avoid. I've got to pay my light bill regardless of whether I make one product or not. I have to pay certain legal fees. I have to lease my building. All of those things are connected to overhead. The interesting thing, excuse me, is generally direct costs are usually associated per unit, and indirect costs are overhead. Net return is the net effectiveness over overhead. Into building. Give me one more dollar, or give me one better income, even by $1, I do that. Okay. There's a lot of things in finance. They'll calculate net present value and the things too. It's like your return on investment. The idea is basically the same. I have no problem investing in my corporation, but I wanted to create an advantage. You've really only got two ways to make this number better. Drive the revenue up, or you can drive costs down. If you drive up costs, you must increase revenue. If you decrease cost, your revenue can stay the same, but your net effectiveness or your return on investment increases. The return on investment is a way of cutting through the confusion of deciding what is the better thing to do. Simple. Does it increase my return on investment? So here's one of those platitudes that you will hear, and one that's important for you to remember. An organization's goal is to maximize overall return on investment. Just remember the return on investment is ratio of net effectiveness over overhead. Important. If you can prove that increases in revenue through vertical integration, go. Now, many times that organizations, through not their lack of their own effort, can't do it. And these are two things that bar integration, regardless of whether they were investment. Yeah, I've kept in the two. That's the way Palmentier. Anyway, is a firm lack and can't obtain the resources. So one of the things that I've talked about again is basically that as entrepreneurs, we always have limited resources. Do not have an infinite world, except if you have the power of Amazon or Walmart and create your channels. If I can't achieve with what I have, then I can't take advantage of it. I was when I was doing the internet service providership, I was like this close to coming up with a solution to have internet through the Gulf Coast, through the Gulf of Mexico. And it required a substantial amount that I just couldn't call up. And now there's a company called Communications. That's the example. The other is that the firm might have other priorities. And if they exhaust their capability to try. Again, this is an acceptance that everybody's capacity and our ability to expand is limited. Live in a fixed and finite world. And sometimes, even though we are advantaged, we just simply can't get. So, if we can do it, we can. But once again, let's talk about the outstanding reasons why we outsource distribution. So under normal circumstances, the market that distributors are in are generally efficient. But these are the things that channel partners can do or what keep them going that have basically puts everything in a buy decision until you can justify it. The first is motivation. They have a very positive incentive and a negative one to perform well. One of the things that we know especially, and this links to the last one in here, is the independence from any single either manufacturer, say distributor, is that there are many, many partners who can do the same job. Specialization, the distributors, it's all they do, and there's no distractions, and that's everything, and that's their life. And that's kind of the way to think about it. Once again, remember I talked about graduates. You want to focus on your core competencies as an organization, nothing else. This is consistent with that thought. A shipper who does shipping, warehouse, does that one thing, and they have no distractions. It's that old saying, you have one job, right? This is it. This is that one job. And it's amazing how well you can do it. So if I were to, an example, Federal Express. So Federal Express came out by a gentleman by the name of Fred Smith. Fred, the founder of Federal Express, interestingly enough, was a Marine who worked in logistics in Vietnam for 3 years. So think about that as a pretty good, all right? He learned a lot while he was there. So when Fred gets out, Fred does, his father owns a series of 6 small departments in Mississippi. He sells them. He wants to invest in the business. First thing he does is he gets his MBA. And he comes up with his master's thesis on this idea of package delivery next day, 10:30. You got to see. And Fred Smith says, if you knew me in college, you know, yes, C is probably as high as I could get. So what was his idea? Let's see if I can find a piece of chalk now. So I'm going to do a very here. We do it this way, from the beach to Charlotte, this way. But the problem is that you have so many convoluted connections So, and this was a traditional model, very, very different. Brad had a different idea. My bad drawing. In his master's thesis, what he came up with is that everything in the United States all goes to a single point in the US, in Memphis, Tennessee. Everything gets switched around in a single warehouse, and then everything gets sent back into the locations where they're supposed to. Fewer lines of communication, talking in military terms, all right? And this got him a seat. He sold his business. He bought, I think it was a half dozen used 737s, started package delivery from there. True story. He was 2 weeks away from payroll that he could not. No, did not. Think about this in terms of, he took the last money out of petty cash. It's a true story. Took the last money out of petty cash, went to Las Vegas, won 60,000 in blackjack, and never returned. Okay. Yeah. I mean, just think about the discipline. I've got 60,000 bucks payroll. I mean, how many people do that? So anyway, it shows you if you specialize in one particular field, in which Fred Smith did, you can think about it in ways that I can't. There's a saying that to become an expert, you need 10,000 hours of fierce concentration. I think if you think about 4 years, you're going to have that much. So that's the advantage of specialization, is to be able to do that. Now, for human beings, we all need generals. We need to be able to do any different. Survival of the failure results. We fail to perform the functions better than the competition. Better Express won the day against UPS because they could actually positively deliver some goods for 1030, and that's where they. Doing all of this, all of a sudden you started having the economies of demand or economies of scale. You put seven together. You provide marketing channel functions for many, and those happen in a similar and like manner. You create an external third party that can call on many small customers more frequently, and that is a strategic advantage. I have 3 cousins are used to that were dairy farmers in Mississippi, in Florence, Mississippi. They would, man, does anybody have dairy farmers in their family? That's a tough job. So they're up at 4:30 in the morning. They start milking at 5:30. They finish maybe probably about 8:30. Go do the farming stuff in the day. 4:30 in the afternoon, the cows start lining again. Start at 5:30 again. Finish around 7. Right? If you take a and the cows don't, you've got to keep them milking. So you've got to find some cover. Anyway, they would do 300 gallons, and they had a delivery service that they never called, knew exactly when it comes to go. It was, they just simply knew the farmers in the area. They knew their capacities. They knew when they would fill up. And that's what that third party can do. Call on small customers more in a way that none of those small farmers is a cooperative do better. The last is independence from any single manufacturer, and I should also say any single distributor as well. Another one of those rules for success that I want you all to remember is diversify risk. Don't put your eggs in one basket. Have more than one thing if you can. All right. Diversifying also means that you provide about which is better and which is not. And so these are overwhelming reasons why you outsource your distribution. It's just better. I mean, let's say you have to make a case for vertical integration. So we talk about all the reasons why. We talk about the return on investment. Powerful reasons why outsourcing is just better. Well, we kind of have to flip around and think about ourselves. What are the unique things that our corporation has that might demand it to be vertically integrating or might lead it in that direction? Well, we all have assets, especially when it comes to distribution. Those assets can be intangible, those assets can be tangible. And we're going to talk about these one at a time, of course, because it doesn't line up right with tangible capability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the next slide, and that's going to describe those intangible capabilities one at a time. So what is an idiosyncratic knowledge? An idiosyncratic knowledge is a unique level of skill or understanding that cannot be readily deployed to another principle. I can't take this wealth of knowledge and use it in another particular field. So years ago, I had somebody come tune my piano by ear. This individual had perfect pitch, and they could tune a piano just by listening to it. That's astonishing. Now, I don't know whether that's for musical or instruments or not. It's very specific to the piano. They do quite well, pay them enough. Idiosyncratic knowledge might be those delivery people who deliver milk, perhaps don't know what it takes to, say, deliver hens. And so a unique knowledge, a specialized skill that can't be crafted or used anywhere else, it might need to be delivered by you to your customer. The next is relationships. I would also say that my milking cousin, Paul, they all had a special relationship with their partners, and it was so good that it was unbreakable. There can be a special connection between you and the personnel and the manufacturer, so much so that it creates an unseen value that you simply don't want to give up. And think of the inverse is true. You're going to tick off a lot of them if you start doing it yourself. Usually a specialized relationship means that things can get fixed quickly and correctly. And those kind of advantages don't. The last is brand. The manufacturer's brand name, or any of the private labels across the United States and North America, Europe. Europe is much more heavily invested in private label brands than we are. And not that we're not on the game itself, but we have a lot of brands out that satisfy the market and do it at a pretty reasonable price. An example I can give you certainly is Apple. Apple is irrespective of the channel, excuse me, whether it's vertical or horizontal, so overwhelmingly powerful that it doesn't need to be vertical, although it can. Another one is Coke. I mean, and Coke also has a unique perspective of their particular good. It's so special. I mean, it's so that it can be found practically in. Okay. So we move to intangible things or from tangible things. Let me kind of break down how this would react before I go. Idiosyncratic knowledge probably lends itself to vertical integration. Relationships probably hamper vertical integration. In other words, because of a special relationship, don't give it up no matter what current equity. And brand equity don't matter. I mean, when you can choose whatever way, if your equity is so strong. are physicality. So a unique one is very unique, customized. Specific. There's an interesting on had FedEx. So in 2020, 2021, Amazon asked very forcefully FedEx to take over 2/3 of the warehousing that they had in Cincinnati. And FedEx said, we can't give you that. We just can't do it. We can't customize those facilities to your particular transaction specific assets. And so they said, okay. Cores is an interesting one. If you notice where it says transaction, we're talking about customized physical facilities. Cores beer. Cores is cold filter. It isn't brewed. It's a very unique way in which they distill cores. But cores have to be cold shipped everywhere in the United States. Those particular facilities in the 70s were not available everywhere. As a matter of fact, we had to make sure that they were in 2 days driving space. So that meant basically is that cores was not available west of Mississippi River. Eventually changed, but that's an example of a transaction-specific asset. Dedicated capacity is when the distribution has been created to serve one particular manufacturer. General. The problem with that is, like FedEx's problem with Amazon, is that dedicated capacity leads to overcapacity. And so what it means is that if I blow off 100,000 acres, 100,000 feet of my particular warehouse for one client only, I'm back that I need that space dedicated to some of the customers. And so customized facility, dedicated capacity. The next, let me see if I site specificity. What that means is a manufacturer may need marketing functions at a particular location, may be less suited for the needs of manufacturers. And so one manufacturer says, if you locate your warehouse within 30 miles of my location, you get. The problem is that relocating those 30 miles may lead you 60 miles further away from other individuals. We have to here, especially, I mean, I remember I was reading an issue on island economies. And I did some little research and I found there were slight correlations between being here in Boone up the mountain and island economies. And I tell my friends, you can't get here unless you're coming. And that's kind of what this means is that the locations themselves create limitations. When my wife about all the time, it's a 2-hour drive from here. Intangible and tangible. Now, we talked about return on investment. We talked about the power of outsourcing. We've talked about the internal structure of a corporation, how they lean themselves towards vertical integration. The last is what's going on in the real world now. And I think if you consider the last 3 years, I say this to my students every once in a while, we're in year one. There's a lot of stuff we're going to be figuring out ourselves in the next decade. And if you're smart enough to be able to figure out ways that things should go, all right, you might be in demand. And because we really don't know where we're going for the next decade or so. think we have good ideas, but we're getting a lot of mixed signals. So your ability to get an idea of what's going on in the future could be helpful. This leads to this idea of environmental uncertainty. Environmental uncertainty affects our decisions to vertically integrate, not surprisingly, to the detriment. But it all depends on what are the products that we develop. Do we have a low specific company resources products? Are our products at example, do we make pencils and rulers? Are we unique and specialized? Because that will tell us. In a highly volatile market with a low specificity, we want to outsource our distribution to retain our flexibility. In uncertain times, it's best to be able to react. And so outsourcing requires no exceptionally long-term commitments, doesn't require us to alter our product line, do anything else, or spend lots of money. It allows us to persevere and wait for opportunities. Now, say we have a really unique product. So let's see. We have my two girls, and talking to a guy manager, and he said, "Oh, all right, a U sand, pardon me, okay, a U is unique because it only has one, all right, sands, hardwood, floors, not softwoods. So, and these sanders are so specialized and so unique that there are no substitutes. So when you look at the bills, it's different. Okay, it's like one of those things. If so, you were to pick it, you were to look at the footprint. It actually has 4 feet, and the feet move in a randomized form. Yeah, they're not. They don't do round sandings. They don't do butt sandings. They don't do belt sandings. They do a purely randomized back and forth, so that the finish is perfect. Okay, so think of that. You know, belt sanders have a way of maybe digging in. Circular sanders have a way of putting, patterns. These sanders do it totally different, and that's the discount, right? I asked them, they make about 20 to 100. They have 20 people that are in their manufacturing. He's the sales manager for us, and that is about specialized I've ever seen. And they have a niche, and that niche is theirs, and nobody has gone into it yet. Let's put it that way. Who knows? But apparently, the way that their sanding does on their footprint, the way it works, is so unique that it is impossible. I wouldn't say impossible, but it is so unique and so specialized that they're number one, and the rest of the world is two. Okay. Anyway, you get one. Okay. So, in a high specific thing, if they promising market, a new place to put their sales, they want to integrate, because in an uncertain time, you want to have as much control as you. You want to have control over the channels, the employees. You avoid the small number of bargaining and changing circumstances. You the iron, and that is a highly promising market. there's no reason to enter into a market that isn't promising, and so you don't enter. And so ultimately what this comes out within generally if I'm product generic distribution, I wait until uncertainty is reduced, then I think product is I do take that chance, but in order to be able to control my destiny, I vertically integrate if I can, if I have the resources to do it. Okay. Just remember, test question, uncertainty favors outside. What are there other reasons to vertically integrate? One of the bigger ones that you see um, difficult in were considering what would be their best options, whether to run company stores or not. And one of the difficulties you have, especially when putting out new products, is you have real difficulty with discerning how well you're performing. Satisfy the end user. There's very little information that tells me sometimes whether I am or not. I can be selling to my wholesalers and my retailers and buying from me because I've sold good things to them before. But the fact is perhaps they may not be performing in the marketplace. I'm getting good service as it goes down the channel system. Who knows if those goods are still on the shelves? And so performance ambiguity is the failure of information to trickle down to the point where a manufacturer cannot discern the level of performance they're receiving. They don't know if they're doing well or not. That causes corporations to vertically integrate. Another way or another reason why going along with performance ambiguity is you want to learn from your customers. Your customers can be a very key component to your success if you know what you're doing right and know how to correct what's wrong. And as you integrate downward, also you gain valuable information, provide a window into your own markets, and a way for the man to consider new things that they may not have considered before. I actually met the CMO of Luxottica. He's actually gotten his PhD now, and he was looking to be hired here in App State. I was talking in November. He had his lens closed back. The difficulty with that, two things. The biggest one is organizational culture. So when you people get your MBAs or you're doing your management, organizational culture can be the make or break between two organizations merging together. And unfortunately, Luxottica really messed up their chances when they bought LensCraft. They bought it so that they could understand the American idea of selling glasses that way. It didn't work out. All right. They didn't reduce their performance ambiguity. They didn't learn from their customers because and so it failed. Right. There are good reasons why. If you follow through and you use them to gain knowledge. But the truth is, in both, a retailer can lose focus by integrating backward, and a manufacturer can lose focus by integrating forward. Once again, we go back to the classic example of you do one thing, you do it very well, and you buy everything else. the thing about it is that you have to be or should be dragged to that position, point where vertical integration makes more sense than anything else. And so they talk about Intermarché, which was a French grocery retailer. They're part of what an IGA, Independent Grocers Association. They decided they were going to integrate backward in food production, and unfortunately, they realized almost too late that they don't produce food, they sell food. And they did not get into it. They got into it with the best of intentions. They did not have the skill set to be able to exploit that successfully. All right. The vertical integration, it consumed an enormous amount of time. It ate away at their core business. Basically, what happened is there was a large call. Let's go back to doing what we're doing. I find Walmart has been out of the online retailer business for quite a while. They originally bought Jet.com, the Walmart. They also bought many other things that were used. They owned Voodoo at one time. That I think a lot of the time to do with this thing is finding the right where they feel like they're not wasting money. Interesting, Walmart had its highest fourth quarter sales, and their retail establishments, their stores, brick, that had one of the worst. So it's kind of interesting how everything shifts. So let's kind of group together and put together all the takeaways from this particular chapter. Okay. So remember, creating a relationship can be a compromise, making it fine. Strong relationships can do everything that you want to do in a retail situation if you feel that is successful. Just remember that vertical integration as a concept begins with the base that thing is a more attractive way of returning on investment. And you're that you make different. Remember that every channel function needs to be taken into consideration to vertical integration. Just remember that nothing is ever binary, all right? There is no absolute buy or an absolute make, but there are many variations in between. And this kind of mentions that if there are no advantages, or let's just say conditions exist, environmental or internal, remember, that prevent you from benefiting from the 6 advantages, then vertical integration may be best. And so the make or buy decision, you can make and buy at the same time. However, you have to have the resources. It's not always cut right. And that you start from the outsource. Okay, we're done today. We're finished with chapter 4. For those of you who are finishing your test, you can sit here and stay. Just bring it to room 412. Hope you all have a great